today we'll have a look at how to leverage automation tools to enhance manual analysis. If automating the tool that can automate work, it doesn't make sense to do it manually, and we'll look into this. So my name is Christian Neves. I work in cybersecurity for about 6 years now. And I've done incident response, forensics, also done malware analysis, and I do pen testing and red teaming. So let's start with the perimeter of a company. So we have our incoming traffic with web sources. So this could be websites, emails, and if we have services exposed, we have a DMZ. Then we have our detection and prevention systems, which can be firewalls, IDS, IPS, depending on the budget that you have. Systems will create security alerts that you should have a SOC that should look into them, and if something is important, it should be analyzed further. These systems also prevent and delete some malicious content if it was detected, and the rest is served to the user. Fortunately, these systems are not bulletproof, and some malicious documents can still go through. That's why it's important to have security in depth and have another layer, like an EDR on the systems, etc., that provide data back to your prevention systems. But even those are not perfect, and sometimes a breach happens. So how you should handle a breach? There's essentially 3 goals. So the analysis process first. So you have to identify all the systems that are affected and make sure that you have all of them identified and that you identified how the attacker got into the system. Otherwise, if you don't do this process properly, you can get attacked back a few weeks later or worse, a few years later, and you don't know where it comes from. Then, when you have identified this, you should have a containment process to isolate this and try to prevent any more damage to your company. Finally, have a recovery process where you patch the initial vector and restore your systems. This is just a quick overview, so if you want more details, you can go to the incident handling guide where it goes into further depth. So here we are going to look at the analysis process because it's the most important and usually where we are called for. So we'll have a look at a malware that is quite old but it's still active, and we'll see the infection flow of this malware. So it starts with the user receives a document, enable the macro, and this document will run a malicious script that's called a dropper, and it will download the first stage malware. So the first one, it's important for the attacker just to get the first malware to get into the system. And these delivery servers are usually compromised servers or the cloud provider, so can be Dropbox, Google Drive, etc. And we'll see later why they use these services. Then this first stage malware gathers some information about the system, and then have some persistent mechanism and contacts a C2 server. This C2 server is usually where the servers that the criminal group actually owns, and these ones are the tools of the attacker. That's why they go through this process to prevent us to find them. Then they will send some commands or some malware, usually ransomware if they want to get money fast. If they want access, they'll send a rat. And they'll repeat this process, which is called beaconing. Well, where it calls the C2, give me some commands, give me some malware, and repeat. So when we do an analysis of this kind of infection, we have a few points where we can get information that we can use to identify affected hosts, and these are the points here. So now we'll start with the first document because we identified that was the document that was provided to the user, identified this was started, and we send it to a sandbox, and this will get our a first result for analysis. So see here, macro created a PowerShell script, and this PowerShell script is encoded, and we don't know what it does, like just looking at it like this. But if we basically for decode it, we can see what it does. So here are some anti-automation. We'll look at the anti-automation features of this small script. So first of all, there's known good URLs mixed with malicious ones. So if we just do a simple regex to extract URLs, we'll get some good URLs that if we use and automatically block, will probably break our company network, because this is Microsoft.com. So if we block Microsoft.com, probably all Microsoft services will stop working. Second, they use a long string separated with multiple malicious URLs. This isn't the case if, for example, one server is down, you can go to the next one, etc. And they use a trick here is to use a character that is URL valid, so it's the @ sign. But if we use a regex, we'll only have one because it's still a valid URL. And also a bit trickier, it's here it checks for the length of the data that it gets back. This is a bit more advanced. It tries to check the data I'm getting back, is this exactly the same size as the malware I'm supposed to have received back. This is to prevent, for example, automation where you just send fake data to the malware to see what it does and extract the behavior of this malware. But by doing this, we have to know exactly the size of the malware that we receive. That's why they use this feature here. Now, if you look at the results of the analysis, we have here 3 results of different sandboxes, and all of them have different results. So apparently the anti-analysis worked, because if we have one, we only have one URL. Others have a bit more, like 1 or 2, and maybe one have all of them, but only the domain. And this is important because if we look at the script here, we can quickly extract the 5 URLs. In this case, it's not very important if we only have the domain, because it's probably not used in your company. But if you have Google Drive, Dropbox, or any other cloud provider, you might not want to block this domain. Otherwise, you will not receive any file or any other service that you might use. So here it's important to have the exact URL if you want to check on your proxy, for example, who downloaded this malware. So you have the full URL, and you know for sure this downloaded the malicious payload, so we might want to isolate this host. Now for the next step, we want to see where does this file is put. So we can see here that it's put in a user profile, but with the name 928. This will be important later. So the magic loop to do the analysis more easily. What we do is take the malware, put it on our detection system. This can be a sandbox. There's open source tools that we can use to do the same, to have the same result. This will generate a report. The analyst look at the report, extract proper data, which is called IOCs, might want to patch the malware so it can run on the sandbox again, and repeat this process again and again. So now we found the link where it downloads the malware. So now we can look with these IOCs what those were affected, and we can already have a broader view of the affected systems. Now for the file name. We could say, okay, we just look for 928 on all the systems, and if you find this file, it's probably the malware. Fortunately, here we can see that it changes the name. Here in the bottom, we can see that the hash is the same, so it's actually the same malware that changed his home name and also the folder where he's stored. So in this case, the sandbox will not help us anymore. We'll have to use we'll have to do some manual reversing, but we have quite a lot of information from the sandbox that we can use to ease our analysis process. So we can see on the right here that we have 928 calls 928 with some parameter, and then it has another name, like the first one is colors minus minimum.exe, another one is MSP term sizes. We don't know exactly where it gets these names, and if we look, we can look at the memory on this when doing an manual analysis and find the full list of the names. And then we can see that it takes two of these names, of these words from this list, put them together, and this is the name. So now we can have a name that we can look for on our systems that is reliable, but we still need to know where it is, because looking for the combination of these two names on the full file system would just take forever. So execution path. So we could see that it was on syswow 64, but if we look at three of the three sandboxes here, we can see that one of them is stored in app data local. What is happening here? So if we just take the first one, we might miss this, and this is why it's sometimes important to have a look manually. So I will explain a bit more into detail what it does. So if we look at the code, we have an API call to open SC Manager, which is the API call just to open the Service Manager of Windows. And the code does is, if it is able to open it, it will set a flag. And then later on the code, it will check if this flag is 1 or 0. And if it's 1, it will do a call. If it's 0, it does the other one. What's on this call? Just a small script that we just call sh get folder path. What is that? It's basically the Windows API to get the $app data, for example, depending on the parameter we gave. So this is what it does. And we can look at the parameter x29, and we see that it's the syswow 64 folder if it's running as admin. If it's running as user, it's app local data. Then here we have username admin, and it's in local app data. What's happening here? So this is why it's important to know how your tools work. So even though the username is admin, it doesn't mean that the malware is running as administrator. So that's why we have this disparity. Then finally, for persistence, I will not go too much into detail. I just did one as an example. So here, it looks if the process is running as admin. As we saw before, it checks for the service manager. This is not only to check if it's admin, it's also to create a service in case it is. Otherwise, it still runs, and it tries to connect to a C2 server. If he's able to connect to a C2 server, it will create a registry key that will run at startup. Otherwise, it'll just kill the process and doesn't do anything. So this means that if you have an automation process in place, you have to make sure that you run it as admin and as user to have both paths. And then you have to make sure that either you have network enabled or you simulate the network that is expecting. So this is not realistic to do on a full automation process. That's why you should always have some manual intervention. So now we have where the malware should be stored, what's the name of the malware, and where it downloads. With this information, it should be enough to find all the affected hosts by this malware. If you want more detail, we can do it, but it will take a lot more reversing, and sometimes it's not worth it, depending on the case. So this is always case-to-case. And just a quick summary. So automation, it's relatively quick. We just put a file in there, wait for it to work. We can do some other work in the side, and it will just do it. Manual, it obviously takes time. We can get results without any knowledge. Just put the file there, we get some report, and then we can read it. Doing it manually requires more technical knowledge. In the minus side for the automation is the results may not have all important information. And if we are trying to prevent a breach or analyze what's the extent of a breach, we might want this information to be accurate. So that's why manual is more gets a point. And finally, automation is victim to anti-analysis, because if we know something is done automatically, we can always find a way to make it break. And doing manual analysis, we can always bypass this for the same reason. So what we can do is find the anti-analysis, patch it, and put it on the automated system. So conclusion, automation tools are a great tool to have initial idea of what to look for. So instead of doing a full manual analysis, so as we saw, the dropper was a macro. Instead of going through the macro, trying to figure out what it does, finding finally the PowerShell, we can just run it, see what it outputs, and uses that as a basis for our manual analysis, and increase our efficiency when doing some analysis work. As I said, it's not that great. Doing an automated analysis doesn't give all the information that you need. It might be good for some malware, but not ideal for others. And automated tools are very good to do the triage part of the work. So if we have 20,000 malware, or I don't know, if we take the 5 URLs, for example, we can just send the 5 URLs files and see if they are the same. Otherwise, we have to go it manually through all of them, and that's why automation can be useful. Okay.